Let's talk about the New York Knicks, a team that was successful, but also now has question marks and changes that have happened. We're going to try and get into those changes and what they mean. Obi's here. He's so keen on the Knicks. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I've done the impossible. I've secured a one-on-one interview with Leon Rose. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms, so you know what to do. Thumb and bang. Check out the mock draft video a few days ago. I don't know what day this is coming out, Saturday, Sunday, I'm not really sure. But the mock draft was released Thursday night in the US. You can go check that out. Basketball Monster is open for the season as well. So check out the projections there. Sync your leagues up when your leagues are open. Play around with the settings, the projections, all that sort of stuff. Engage in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Drop in the comments here, of course, on YouTube also. So we're talking about this New York's Knicks team. New York is the correct word. New York Knicks team. So we'll get into talking about the New York Knicks. We're talking about the New York Knickerbockers, and to do that, one of the hosts of the Locked On Knicks podcast is here, Gavin Schall, back for another season of previewing this team. We are in a different position this year, Gavin, of course, because Tom Thibodeau is no longer there. Lots of consternation amongst NBA people, Knicks fans. What more could he do? He's done so well. But I as you know from these shows we've done, I'm fully on board with that because Thibodeau brings a certain thing, but he also leaves a lot. He takes a lot off the table and he limits what a team can do. He limits the ceiling. He puts a lot of restrictions on things that can happen. And if you do have these high-level championship expectations and aspirations, you got to make tough calls. Now, I reckon there's less than a 50% chance that it is an upgrade of a coach. That's possible, but to me, we have seen the limitations of Thibodeau. We're going to talk a little bit more about Mike Brown later on. But after the initial, shock that people had, to me, it wasn't a shock, but the shock that people had, how has been, I guess, the general vibe around that change around the Knicks now?
I think if you're talking fan base, there's probably still some level of consternation there. I think we did as good of a job as possible in our show preparing people for that possibility. It was something Alex and I had been I hesitate to say advocating for, certainly earlier in his tenure, but we were sort of wait and see throughout the regular season. I do think what happened with the starting lineup was to some extent or another coaching malpractice. The unit played substantially more minutes than any other five-man group in the NBA over the course of the season. They were a net negative after January 1st because of an adjustment teams made to put their bigs on Josh Hart, their wings on Karl Anthony Towns. And Tom Thibodeau, instead of using the regular season with a whole lot of runway to experiment and perhaps find a better alternative, he instead decided to wait until the Eastern Conference Finals or excuse me, I guess did he make it? No, it was the Eastern Conference Finals where he finally made a change. So that obviously was too little, too late, and the Knicks did not really lean into their best lineup. So that's kind of ultimately what spelled his doom.
That's why, honestly, that is why that firing him makes sense. Because, Gavin, as you know, and I don't want to harp on this, but that's not the first time that's happened. Shout out to Alfred Payton. Like he doesn't use any of the regular season to see what happens. Look at the team that won the championship. Mark Dagnott literally said this out loud. He's like, we're going to try different lineups because we just need to see what works. We need to see with Hartenstein or Caruso or Wiggins or Joe or whoever's in that line. We want to see different situations, combinations in different scenarios to see what works. And Thibodeau doesn't do it until like every person around him is screaming in his face like, bro, can you like do something different? He's like, no. And then it's like eventually you get there and you can't do it. Again, the Alfred Payton one should have been the nail in the coffin to me because it was so blindingly obvious. But then to repeat the same problem year on year is where you have that limitation. But that does bring us to the first question that we want to talk about, because you talk about that starting lineup, and we saw them go with Josh Hart in the starting lineup. Now, whether you want to call Josh Hart the 3 or Anunoby the 3, whatever, Josh Hart plays this sort of rebounding style. Karl Anthony Towns went back to playing a center, in large part because Mitchell Robinson was out for most of the season. Precious Achiuwa was, as we can tell, unsigned and bad. So they didn't have other options. But Robinson is back. He should be healthy. It doesn't mean that he's going to stay healthy. But do you think that Mike Brown will go into a season or this season with a lineup with Mitchell Robinson starting and Josh Hart coming off the bench?
I have no idea, Josh. Honestly, there's been reporting that Mike Brown was inclined that way and he was interested in the double big. There's been reporting that he was gonna ram his head into that same exact wall Tom Thibodeau rammed his head into and say, you know what, it's not those five that don't work together. It was just some of the coaching. And you know what? It's plausible that with a more creative coach offensively that lineup works. There were certainly ways around that I don't think Tom Thibodeau totally experimented with. Personally, I would start neither of those guys. I would start Deuce McBride, who was the only Knick in all 5 of their best lineups last season, and was a part of 2 of the 15 best lineups in the NBA that played at least 100 possessions last year. Interestingly, one of them was the starting lineup with Deuce and for Mikal Bridges, not for Josh Hart, but I don't know how well that would go over. I do think it's very safe to say, barring something shocking, that Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns will all be starters. Whether it's Mitch, whether it's Josh, whether it's Deuce. I mean, heck, I would be interested in seeing Gershon Yabusele in that starting lineup. I think that could potentially work pretty well. We are going to see. My biggest thing is that regardless of who starts, it's just that we get more lineup diversity. I mentioned that number earlier, but over 1,800 possessions of that starting 5 last year. Like you could be a little bit more like Cleveland, to had a really effective starting 5, but they only played them about 520 possessions the entire season, right? As long as you mix it up, as long as you're trying different groups, I don't think it matters all that much who the starting lineup is. That being said, I would start Deuce McBride, who actually starts. I think it is a coin flip between Mitchell Robinson and Josh Hart.
That is going to be interesting because, like, I do my projections at Basketball Monster, and I've got 4 guys locked in as solid starters. The 4 you mentioned, Anunoby, Bridges, Brunson, Towns, and the 3 guys that I've got is like, oh, maybe they're going to start. It is Hart, it's Robinson, and it is Yabusele. And I thought I was maybe on an island with that as an option, but we'll see. The other thing is, you talk about Juice McBride, that never ever entered my head, right, as an option, because I also think Juice McBride, who played 25 minutes a game last season, they had an incredible lack of depth. I worry that maybe he even pushes down a little bit in the rotation. I think there's a worry of that because Jordan Clarkson is there now, whereas McBride was like, hey, anyone is hurt, Juice McBride is going to move into this starting lineup because he's going to be ahead of Landry Shamet, he's going to be ahead of whatever, Cameron Payne. But now I'm not so sure, like, because you can put Yabusele in there, you can put Hart in there if he's the guy coming off the bench, you can put Jordan Clarkson into that group as well. So he's someone who I had some ups and downs last season, McBride. I really like him as a player, but I'm a little worried that he actually loses out somewhat this season.
Yeah, I think that's totally plausible. It's become abundantly clear throughout his NBA career that he should not play the point guard position. They have been a substantially better team when he plays the 2 versus the 1, just not really a high level initiator of offense. So many of his possessions, especially when he plays as a backup point guard in the playoffs, like you get 20 seconds in the shot clock before he does anything. So as much as I love him, I don't love him there. And because of that, if there was ever a Jalen Brunson injury, I'd be with you. I think Jordan Clarkson would be the clear guy to be inserted. I do hope his defense gets him on the floor. I do think he's probably right with Jalen Brunson, and you have to put Karl Anthony Towns in that mix, like clearly the best shooter on the roster and just a substantially better shooter than OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, in that he has a quicker trigger instead of being like a toe the line 3-point shooter. He can give you somewhat of a facsimile of that Dante DiVincenzo deep spacing, even if he doesn't go that far. What's been just abundantly clear throughout his Knicks career is that when he's on the floor, good things happen for the New York Knicks. I mean, last season when he played 2 guard, they were plus 8.4 net rating. In the playoffs, even though he shot terribly, that net rating actually went even higher. It's plus 7.6 in the playoffs. So I would personally, again, I would really prioritize getting him minutes no matter what. I'm with you that it's very plausible that Mike Brown does not see it the same way, and he maybe suffers the same fate that Keon Ellis did in Sacramento, even if there might have been some extenuating circumstances going on there.
One quick thing on Hart before we get into the next segment is he played 38 minutes a night last season. He saw his shooting numbers sort of spike out of nowhere. I'm going to be like, people loved him from a fantasy perspective. I am going to look, I'll say it right now, Gavin. There's 0 chance that Josh Hart plays 38 minutes a game. It's not going to happen. He's not going to. And when you combine that with unlikely to continue that level of shooting efficiency, where he's not proven as that type of a shooter. Yeah, he's a great rebounder. He showed some really strong passing stuff last season, Josh Hart, but there's just no way that he's running out there 38 minutes a night, is there?
I would really hope not, John. Again, that's presumably part of the reason you got rid of Tom Thibodeau, right? And to be clear, when you asked me that question at the beginning, those were my reasons for firing Tom Thibodeau. I'm not so sure that was the front office's reasoning. I think the minutes and specifically the complaints about the minutes led very publicly by Mikal Bridges, and what was kind of a shocking showdown at the time late in the Knicks regular season. That feels like probably internally that was a bigger deal. And I got to imagine Josh Hart is a focal point of that. To me, and seemingly to you, it is so abundantly clear that he is a more effective player, playing somewhere between 26 to 32 minutes a game. I think for me, it'd be perfect if he settled in more so in that 28 to 30 range. He was dealing with, there was a complicated name for it, but it was essentially runner's knee. And you saw his effectiveness like really fall off after the All-Star break, right? He was shooting 56% from the field pre-All-Star break, only 45% post-All-Star break. Mm-hmm. The free throw shooting fell off dramatically. I don't know if you could blame that specifically on the knee, but he just by and large did not look consistently explosive in the playoffs. He certainly had games, particularly 1 and 2 against the Celtics, where he was spectacular. He was clearly wiped by that Pacers series, right? Just kind of a pathetic showing in that game 6. And to me, the single biggest factor there is managing his minutes and let him be just the absolute, seemingly, to be clear, I don't want a lawsuit, seemingly coked out maniac. He is at his absolute best on the basketball court, and that's playing limited minutes.
You're right. And like, this is, again, we'd go back to Tom Thibodeau. I'm going to talk Mike Brown in a second, but like, this is the thing is you get to these games and everyone is done. Like, they're cooked. They can't push through. They've been dealing with injuries all season, even though they might be sort of under the surface, and they can't get. They're already at the extra level. And every other team just goes, all right, now it's time for us to ramp up. And these guys go, what am I supposed to do? I can't. There's nothing more to give. We've given it all, and we are actually declining versus pushing up. And again, this is crazy to say for a team that made the conference finals, but it is the reality of the scenario. We're going to come back and talk about Mike Brown joining this team in a sec. Today's episode, though, is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. It might be 401ks. It might be properties, it might be investments. A lot of people might not be able to know what their team's general manager or vice president of basketball operations looks like, because he never gives a public statement at all. But that's beside the point of Monarch Money, because Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes and see clear data, visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. You have subscriptions that you're paying for that you might not know about. You link your stuff up with your partner, so your spending, have your goals, all that in the one spot. Don't let the financial opportunities slip through your cracks. Not your cracks, the cracks. Your cracks, do whatever you want with them. That's not Monarch Money's business. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That is 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. All right, enough crack talk. Gavin, we are here to talk about Mike Brown taking over the job, and the two guys that seem to be in contention for this spot for most of the offseason were Mike Brown and Michael Malone, two coaches who probably, alongside Nick Nurse, have some of the Tom Thibodeau ethos of like, let's run our starters big minutes as much as possible. Now, we can talk about Thibodeau and the minutes and all that sort of stuff, and we know that, but there are other coaches who do it, and Brown is one of them. Part of the issue with Thibodeau was not really trusting any bench guys or seeing what they can do. I have a question here that says, and you can read that on screen, it says, will Mike Brown use the depth? I guess the second part of that question is what depth? Because what the hell is this roster? There are no two-way guys currently signed. There are actually only 12 guys under contract, and the bottom 3 of those players are Tyler Kolek, Pacome Dadier, and Ariel Hakporti. They were all rookies last season, who, of course, as being rookies, they combined for under 600 minutes, I believe, or maybe 620 minutes combined for 3 players. So there actually is no depth. Like, we're talking about, like, Hart, Yabusele, Robinson, Clarkson, McBride as those other 5 guys, apart from the 4 locked-in starters. So while we might sit here and want the Knicks to use the depth and we want to experiment with lineups, like, how do we see this? Because what is going on with this roster? Why are we not getting some players filling out the back end of it? And how do you think that Brown will use, maybe even those guys like Dadier and Kolek, not saying they're good because they're not, or Hakporti, do you think that we'll actually get sprinkles of them in, or is it just going to be like, hey, we've got 9 guys and that's it?
Yeah, so I hear you. All fair points. I think I'd push back on the idea that there's no depth. Let's just say hypothetically, Mitch starts. Josh Hart, Deuce McBride, Gershon Yabusele, Jordan Clarkson. I would guess 6 through 9. That's one of the 5 to 10 best 6 through 9 in the NBA. Maybe,
I agree.
Maybe that's a little okay. Maybe that might be a little.
No, I think that's fine. But like when I say depth, it's like that's great, right? That's great. But when one person misses, that means you've got 8 players.
Everyone moves up.
You don't have the 10th guy to move into the 9th spot. It means you're running at like the barest minimum of you've got 9 guys that are really good. But most teams do run a 10-man rotation. The Pacers showed playing this 11-man balls to the wall sort of style was successful. Teams are going to copy that. Where the Knicks are like, if we have 2 people out, then we're done because look, who else is there? And that's when I talk about lack, I want them to use the depth, but I just worry that there is no back end depth. Like I just finished talking about the Clippers, and like their 11th man is Nicholas Batum, right? Mm-hmm. Versus it being Pacome Daddier. Like that's a pretty sizable difference.
Yeah, I hear you. And to be clear, they're good at bringing one more guy. We've heard the rumors over and over again that it could potentially be Ben Simmons. Ian Begley proposed the idea of them potentially trading Tyler Kolek to create one more spot, and then they could bring back Ben Simmons and Landry Shamet. I don't know how much you want to get into that personally. I'm far more in favor of them bringing in Landry Shamet, who is arguably one of their 6 best players in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I've never seen Landry Shamet play basketball like that, but if he could replicate even some proportion of that from a 3-and-D perspective, that would be incredible for the New York Knicks. But even if it's Ben Simmons, someone who could be a regular season inning eater potentially. So there will be a 10th guy who is a real NBA rotation player. Could even be Malcolm Brogdon. That's someone they've still maintained some interest in. But as far as the very back end of the roster, there to have some concern. I do think out of that group, Ariel Hukporti is the cleanest one to potentially play some NBA minutes. I do as well. Like, again, very limited role, but man, he was dramatically better than I thought he'd be. He's like absolutely huge, really athletic, already has that Isaiah Hartenstein, like 8-foot flip shot, down pat, solid rim protector, good short roll passer, like skilled, big, athletic. Like, I don't know. I kind of think that guy's going to end up having an 8 to 10 year career as a backup big. The other guys, the real question marks, right? I would assume Kevin McCullough Jr. gets one of those 2-way spots, 25-year, or I think will be 25 around, like at least by March of the season. Someone you would think could hold their own defensively, can give you a little bit off the dribble. The jumper's a question, but him as a break in case of emergency guy. Pacome Daddier, who brings a lot of size to the table, look good. Incredibly limited minutes defensively last year. Jumpers clearly come along a lot from his time in Europe. So I'm not trying to propose these guys. If these guys are getting substantial minutes for the Knicks after the first round of the playoffs, right, they are in deep, deep trouble. But in terms of the regular season, I think the rest of the roster's depth and the talent can afford you, if you are playing a guy who probably shouldn't be an NBA level rotation player, for let's just say 10 minutes a game in an emergency scenario, I think they can get by. Where your point has real concern and real merit is, I think the Knicks were remarkably healthy last year. OG and Anunoby in particular, remarkably healthy last year. I don't believe, even with more limited minutes, the Knicks can count on that again. So it could crop up as a real problem.
Kevin McCullough was one of those guys last season that I was on McCullough watch to see whether he'd be a player that was on a roster to start the season that would play 0 minutes without being injured all year. He got there at the end. We got to about 29 minutes total that he played over the course of the season, including 22 in the season finale. One of the questions, I guess, with the depth on this team is, again, we can talk about using that depth, and that means Yabusele and Clarkson and McBride playing more minutes. Like, how do you see guys like Brunson or Towns? And Towns, how many times do we see him hobbling around in fourth quarters and go, what is this guy doing out there? Do we think that we're going to see, like, knocking the top off a little bit of those minutes, like just 1 to 2 fewer minutes to preserve some of those health concerns? Because obviously Brunson hurt at the end of the season, Towns limping continually. Do you think we're going to see a little bit of that sort of lent into where you've got Yabusele, Clarkson in particular as more reliable guys versus it being Cameron Payne or Precious Achiuwa coming off the bench?
Yeah, I don't really think there's a reason for anyone on this team to play more than 35 minutes. And look, we can question the impact that has come playoff time, right? Cleveland, very famously last year, I think Donovan Mitchell was, better than I would, but around 33 minutes at most.
I don't even know if he got to that. I think he was actually lower than that, to be honest.
It could have been 31, and then all those guys get hurt in the playoffs. So obviously one team does not a sample size make, but you could question the science on it. I am absolutely with you. I don't think it is at all sustainable what they're doing with Jalen Brunson. ESPN had a stat that he had the ball in his hands, I think, just under 9 minutes a game last year. That was most of anyone in the NBA. 6'2" guard, has taken a beating the last couple of seasons. Ridiculous usage come playoff time. Have to find a way to keep him fresh to preserve his career. Karl-Anthony Towns looked like he was playing, to your point, with one leg at so many different points last season. I put together a mock rotation, and this is, to be clear, my ideal, not what I expected to be. I had Jalen Brunson at 36 minutes. I had OG Anunoby at 32. I had McHale at 32. I had Josh Hart all the way down to 24, which I don't think is realistic. I think he'll play more than that. I had Karl-Anthony Towns 33, Yabusele 18, Mitch 21, Deuce 26, Clarkson only at 18. Like, I think they could easily be the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference with the margin of error they should have and not push the minutes of any of these guys. There's no reason to do it. They should get frequent nights off. Like, I don't really see any reason to go down that Tom Thibodeau path of treating the regular season like the Super Bowl instead of the playoffs and the NBA Finals as your Super Bowl.
We're going to come back and talk about OG Anunoby because he was an interesting player. You already talked about the fact that OG was able to stay healthy, which he hadn't in the past. And even like when he came across in the trade mid-season, the season before, he had some, like, he was struggling a little bit in Toronto. There were some nice little signs, but yeah, he was good. And then he had the weird arm issue that seemed to linger and whatever else was going on. But he continued and played a lot last season and was healthy. But the thing that, some people will be aware of this, but he also, as the season went on, and when Jalen Brunson went out, but even when Brunson came back, he just became this high usage player. And it worked. I don't know how it worked. I don't know why it worked. I don't know why we went into this situation where OG just became this guy that was starting to become a relied upon offensive player. Do you think that is a Brunson absence thing? Do you think that is something that they will lean into more because it was a very stark difference? Like, again, you can look at the overall numbers and they're not like, they don't stand out hugely. He was at 19.5 usage in his 37 minutes. He averaged 18, 5 and 2. Like, his steal and block numbers are there. He shot the ball, really solidly, but it did have a noticeable change in the middle of the season. It did start to fall a little bit when Brunson came back, but where do you see that? Because he was up to getting 25, 26 usage for a 2-month period, basically.
He did. He had such a weird season, man. For first 18 games or so, we were talking about not really an all-star conversations, like an all-NBA conversation. He was that efficient. He was that good defensively. Had a 30-game stretch or so where the defense really fell off. The efficiency really fell off. Just could not hit a three for, like, it felt like a month and a half. And then to your point, Brunson gets hurt. And that was really out of necessity more than anything else, right? They just had a real dearth of ball handlers, like a big difference between Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle is that for people who don't watch the Knicks or didn't watch the Timberwolves in the past, Cat is not really a guy you can give the ball to, and he just bulldozes his way into the lane, draws three guys, sprays it out for a corner three, right? He's just not a talented passer off a live dribble in that way, the same way Julius Randle was. And in turn, the Knicks needed to find some facsimile of that. They got a little bit of it from Mikal Bridges. They got a tiny bit of it from Tyler Kolek off the bench. They got a whole lot of it from OG Anunoby. I never expected some of the passing they saw from him in that stretch. I think there was like a 10-game stretch where he was 28, 8 and 5, I want to say, and he was shooting like 59% from the field, 47% from three, 87% from the line. Like, he was ridiculous, and some of that was unsustainable shooting. What was crazy is, like, he's always felt like very methodical and almost borderline robotic as a ball handler. Like, he was cooking guys, Josh. Like, you could have thrown him on an and one mixtape at a certain point, like double between the legs.
I'd never seen anything like it from him. I don't know what was going on. It was like, who is this guy? Like, he has never shown this, and he was like, yeah, I'm a number one now. It's like, I don't think so. But then he just kept doing it, and he kept doing it. And, all of his advanced metrics were sky high. He had a true shooting of like 69% for like his 2-month period. Everything went up, and I don't know if it's an evolution. I don't know if it was a weird blip. Because in the playoffs it did sort of come back to earth a bit. And to me, it's one of the big sources, because if he can elevate into that guy, and we've seen Mikal Bridges jump into that role, and it doesn't work that well, and we know about his issues and the concerns with putting him in this larger role. But with OG in a larger offensive role, if that's able to sustain it, it does change, I guess, the dynamics of this squad.
Yeah, I mean, it was the epitome when someone says a player's acting different. That was the epitome. Some people theorize it had to do with which actresses were watching courtside MSG. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that.
I forgot about that story.
Yeah. Shout out Suni Lee. I think people talk about. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. I don't think it's going to significantly impact how he's used next year, just because that really isn't who he's been throughout his career. I do think, like, the one thing I would try to do is just get him the ball in less stagnant situations. Like, we saw, it was very rare, but like the couple times during the season in the playoffs where they used him as a roller, or where they used him in like a big pick and roll with Karl Anthony Towns, like it was fun. There were good results, and just getting him momentum going towards the rim. Because, as you know, like he is a freak of nature, incredibly strong, great leaper off the run. Like that, I think, is a little bit real. Or like possessions where he's slingshotting off a screen and can attack with some momentum, right? I think him catching the ball at the wing, going to work from a standstill, is not something that should be happening when Jalen Brunson's on the floor. I do think, despite your fair critiques of Mikal Bridges, given what he did in Brooklyn, at least for some stretch with some efficiency, he's probably a little bit more equipped to operate as a lead ball handler if Brunson's out for a substantial time. I just think it's something you have to work in fits and spurts. And I do think maybe the most important impact of that is you get like a happier OG Anunoby and a more engaged defensively OG Anunoby when he gets consistent touches on the ball, because he certainly believes and has believed for the majority of his career that can be a part of his game and he can be good. And you know what? He proved it to some extent late last season.
Well, if you've got the number for Sonia Lee or for Anne Hathaway, you can get them down to all these games, maybe even fly them out to some road games, and we'll see what sort of an impact that makes. Gavin, maybe even get them on Locked On Knicks, see if it gives a bump to your numbers. Well, you never know. Maybe it's just a general tonic for everyone's performance.
OG Anunoby will be watching if that happens.
There you go. Let's get it happening. Let's get them over there, and of course, let's get everyone over to Locked On Knicks to listen to you guys talk about this Knicks season, which is one of change, one with still very high hopes, and one who's again, the preseason story isn't even written yet because again, this roster's still not complete. But we'll see exactly where that goes. I think that Malcolm Brogdon one you mentioned will be a very interesting signing. As much as he's broken down, their ball handling or passing skills across the roster sort of drops off pretty dramatically. So we'll see exactly what happens there. Gavin, thank you again for coming on and talking about the New York Knicks in a new era of the Knicks. And everyone check out Locked On Knicks. Thank you again.
Highlight of my year every year, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Of course, if this is the highlight of Gavin's year, then he probably needs to work on maybe some other fun things during the year. But that's good because he was cool here, and it was good to have a chat about this Knicks team. He always brings a lot of numbers, a lot of interesting things, and this team is going to be different. If you're expecting Josh Hart to do what he did last season, you're going to be wrong. So let's see exactly how that all plays out. Of course, we are here to hit the subscribe button, to hit the thumbs up, and to leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.